What would you do if a 9-year-old kid in duct-taped boots said he could heal your child, and turned out to be right? It was a cold morning in Birmingham, Alabama. Not cold enough for snow, but cold enough that your breath hung in the air and your fingers ached. People moved quickly in and out of the Children's Medical Center on 7th Avenue, bundled in scarves, clutching coffee, rushing like they could outrun whatever had brought them there. But one person wasn't rushing. He sat still near the revolving doors, on a flattened cardboard box, quietly sketching in a worn notebook. His name was Ezekiel, Zeke, Carter, just 9 years old. His coat was a size too big, sleeves rolled up. One of his boots had duct tape across the toe. A red knit beanie sat, low on his forehead, barely covering his ears. Zeke didn't beg. He didn't ask for anything. He just watched people come and go. He was there most Saturdays. At first, hospital staff tried to shoo him away, but over time, they gave up. Zeke didn't cause any trouble. He just smiled when people spoke to him. When Zeke wasn't sketching in his notebook, he was watching. Always watching. Most people assumed he had a parent inside, maybe a sick sibling. Maybe he was just waiting for a ride. But no one asked too many questions. Not in a place like that. Across the street, a dark silver Range Rover idled beside a fire hydrant. The engine stayed on, but the driver didn't move. Behind the wheel sat Jonathan Reeves, a man in his late 40s with a sharp jawline and graying temples. His tie was loose, his collar creased. He had money. You could tell by the shine of the SUV, even under the dull glow of the hospital's lights. But he looked worn out, like a man running on fumes. In the back seat, a booster chair held his daughter, Issa. 6 years old, brown curls tucked behind one ear, her legs covered by a soft pink blanket. Her eyes were wide open, but she didn't speak. The accident had changed everything. One moment, she was climbing trees and racing cousins in the backyard. The next, she was paralyzed from the waist down. Silent. Still. Jonathan got out, opened the rear door, and gently lifted Issa into his arms. He carried her toward the hospital entrance. He didn't notice Zeke. Most people didn't. But Zeke noticed him. He saw the way Jonathan cradled her like she might break. He saw how Issa's eyes stayed locked on the sky, refusing to look at the building. Zeke watched longer than usual. Then, just before they passed, he stood up. "Sir," he called out, "I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan froze, not because he was confused or offended, but because of how the words were spoken. Not like a sales pitch, not like a joke. Soft, clear, serious, like Zeke believed it with all his heart. Jonathan turned, eyes narrowed. "What did you just say?" Zeke didn't flinch. He stepped forward, notebook tucked under one arm. "I said," he repeated, "I can help her walk again." Jonathan stared at the boy, his arms tightening around Issa. "That's not funny, kid." "I wasn't joking," Zeke replied. His voice was steady. No smile, no hesitation, just that same quiet tone. A kind of stillness far too old for a 9-year-old. Jonathan glanced down at him. The oversized coat, the duct-taped boot, the cracked, glasses hanging from his collar. It had to be a coincidence, maybe even a scam. Without saying another word, he turned and walked into the hospital. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. Zeke's voice echoed in his mind, not filled with hope or desperation, but spoken like a simple truth. Like the boy knew. Jonathan tried to push it away. For the next few hours, he sat through Issa's appointments, listening to therapists, neurologists, specialists. They all used the same phrases. Managing expectations, long road ahead, miracles take time. He'd heard it all before, but Zeke's words stayed with him, gnawing at the back of his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. "I can make your daughter walk again." By early afternoon, Jonathan and Issa stepped out of the building. The sun had broken through the clouds, but the cold still lingered, biting through layers. He carried Isa toward the car as always, her head resting against his shoulder, her small body too light for a girl her age. Then he saw him. Zeke, still sitting in the same spot, on the same cardboard box, notebook in hand. Except now, he wasn't drawing. He was staring straight at Jonathan, like he'd been waiting, like he knew he'd come back. Jonathan stopped. He looked down at Isa, eyes closed, breathing softly. Then he turned and walked toward the boy. "You again?" he muttered. "Why would you say something like that? You think this is funny?" Zeke shook his head slowly. "No, sir." "You don't even know her?" Jonathan snapped, gently lowering Isa into the car seat. In the back seat, Jonathan placed Isa down gently. "You don't know what she's been through," he said, his voice tight. "You don't know what we've been through." Zeke didn't flinch. "I don't have to know her to help." Jonathan straightened, exasperated. "You're what? 9? Almost 10? Exactly. You're a little kid sitting outside a hospital with duct tape on your boots. What could you possibly know about helping someone like my daughter?" Zeke looked down, fingers idly tracing the worn edge of his notebook. "My mama used to help people walk again," he said softly. "She was a physical therapist. She taught me things. Said the body remembers, even when it forgets for a while." Jonathan stared at him, disbelief settling deeper in his chest. "So what? You watched her do some stretches and now you think you're a doctor?" "I watched her help a man walk again after 5 years in a wheelchair," Zeke replied, lifting his eyes. "She didn't have machines or nurses, just her hands, her patience, her faith." Jonathan opened his mouth to argue, but stopped, out. Of the corner of his eye, he noticed a nurse passing by who gave Zeke a small wave. A janitor nodded in his direction. They all seemed to know him, like he belonged here. "I'm not giving you money," Jonathan said. "I didn't ask for money." "Then what do you want?" Zeke took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Just 1 hour. Let me show you." Jonathan glanced back at Isa. Her eyes were open now, watching them both silently. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I should walk away right now," he thought. Zeke didn't move. "I should call security," Jonathan added silently. Still, the boy stood quietly, unmoving. Finally, Jonathan exhaled sharply. "Fine. You want to waste your time, kid? Meet us at Harrington Park, tomorrow, noon. Don't be late." Zeke nodded once. "I'll be there." Jonathan climbed into the SUV, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. But in the rearview mirror, he saw Zeke, still standing there, watching. Zeke was still standing there, hands at his sides, his face unreadable. Later that night after dinner, Jonathan sat in his home office. Papers were scattered across the desk, but none of them made sense. His mind kept drifting back to that boy, the way he stood so still, like he knew something. From the hallway, Isa peeked her head into the room. "Daddy?" she asked. He turned. "Yeah, baby?" Who was that boy? Jonathan hesitated. "Just someone we met outside the hospital." He looked like he believed it, she said. Believed? What? That I could walk? He stared at her, lips parting slightly. She gave the faintest smile and walked her fingers across the armrest of her wheelchair. Tiny steps, like pretend legs. Jonathan didn't smile, because for the first time in what felt like forever, something inside him stirred. Not fear, not pain, something more dangerous. Hope. Harrington Park was the kind of place people drove past without a second glance. A worn-out basketball court, a few rusted swings with chains that squeaked, and a patchy grass field that tried its best to be a soccer pitch. By noon on a Sunday, it was usually empty. But not that day. Zeke was already there, sitting on a bench beneath the big oak tree. He wore the same oversized coat, but the notebook was tucked away. At his feet sat a small gym bag, and beside him, on the bench, a neatly folded towel. At 12:07, Jonathan's SUV pulled into the lot. He didn't say a word at first, just got out, gently lifted Isa from her seat, placed her in her wheelchair, and wheeled her toward Zeke. His jaw was tight, arms crossed. He looked like he was already regretting being there. Zeke stood as they approached. "Hi again," he said politely. Jonathan gave a curt nod. Isa waved shyly. Zeke smiled at her. "Hi, Isa." Her eyes brightened. "Hi." Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "How do you know her name?" "You said it yesterday," Zeke replied calmly. "I remember stuff," Zeke replied simply. Jonathan didn't respond. He just nodded toward the towel. "So what now? Magic carpet ride?" Zeke ignored the sarcasm. "No, sir. Just the basics." He unzipped the small gym bag and began taking out its contents. A pair of clean socks, a tennis ball, a small jar of cocoa butter, and a plastic container wrapped in cloth that seemed to be holding something warm. Jonathan squinted. "What is all that?" "Stuff my mom used," Zeke said. "The rice is for heat. It helps loosen tight muscles. The ball's for pressure points." Jonathan folded his arms again, still skeptical. Zeke turned to Isa. "If it's okay with you, can I work with your legs for a bit? Nothing will hurt, I promise. And if anything feels weird or bad, just say, stop, okay?" Isa looked up at her father. Jonathan sighed. "You can try, but be careful." Zeke knelt beside her wheelchair. Gently, he unwrapped the blanket from her legs and placed the warm cloth rice pack over her thighs. Isa flinched. "Too hot?" he asked. She shook her head. "It feels good." Zeke nodded and waited, letting the warmth sink in. After a few minutes, he began softly moving her legs. No tugging or force, just slow, careful rotations. Side to side, up and down, Jonathan hovered, arms crossed, ready to intervene at the first sign of discomfort. But nothing went wrong. "You ever done this before?" he asked, suspicious. Zeke kept his eyes on Isa's legs. "My mama used to take me to shelters after school. She helped veterans, people who couldn't afford therapy. She always said, everybody deserves to feel human again. I used to carry her bag." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "And she taught you all this?" "Yeah," Zeke said. "She said the body doesn't always need fancy, just attention." He gently tapped Isa's knee with his knuckle. "You feel that?" Isa shook her head. "No." Zeke didn't flinch. "That's okay. I'll keep asking." He kept talking to her as he worked, asking about her favorite colors, what foods she liked, what shows she liked to watch. At first, Isa's answers were short, but then she started asking her own questions. "Do you live around here?" "Kind of." "Do you go to school?" "I used to." "Why not anymore?" Zeke hesitated. "My mom got sick. Then she passed. I've been trying to figure things out since." Isa looked down. "I'm sorry." Zeke gave her a small, genuine smile. "Thanks." Nearby, Jonathan's posture softened just slightly, but he still didn't speak. After about 30 minutes, Zeke gently tapped Isa's ankle again. "You feel that?" Isa blinked. "A little. Like pressure." Zeke looked up at Jonathan. "That's good." Jonathan squinted. "She sometimes says that during her regular sessions." "Yeah," Zeke replied, "but those sessions are in rooms full of machines. Sometimes that makes kids nervous. They tighten up without meaning to." He motioned toward the open air around them. "But out here, there's sky, trees. It feels different." Jonathan didn't respond, but he was clearly listening now. Zeke helped Isa stretch both legs, then guided her through a few simple movements, just trying to get her toes to wiggle. She tried. Nothing obvious happened, but she didn't seem discouraged. "I'll show you again next week," Zeke said, rising to his feet. "It takes time, but your muscles," He pointed gently to her thighs. They still remember. You just have to remind them. Isa smiled, a real smile, wider this time. Okay. Jonathan cleared his throat. We're not promising anything, he said quickly. Zeke nodded. I'm not either. I'm just trying. Jonathan looked at him for a long second. Then, almost without thinking, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded bill, and held it out. Zeke stepped back. No, sir. I don't want your money. Jonathan looked taken aback. Then why are you doing this? Zeke shrugged. Because your daughter smiled. Jonathan glanced down at Isa. She was still smiling, soft, content, a little hopeful. And for the life of him, he couldn't understand how a boy who had lost everything could still have so much to give. She was just a girl he barely knew. The following Sunday was warmer, but Zeke still wore his jacket, not because he needed it, but because it made him feel close to his mom. She used to call it his helper's coat. Said every good healer needed something that reminded them why they care. By 11:45, Zeke was already at Harrington Park. The towel was laid out, supplies neatly lined up, and a bottle of water rested beside him. A few kids played basketball on the nearby court, and a dog barked in the distance. Right at noon, Jonathan's SUV pulled up. Isa was already grinning before the car came to a full stop. Hi, Isa, Zeke called out, waving. Hi, she chirped back, her curls bouncing as Jonathan helped her into the wheelchair. Jonathan looked tired, but different, less burdened than the week before. He gave Zeke a small nod. No words, but the gesture said enough. Zeke got to work, the same setup as before, the warm cloth pack, the stretches. But this time, something had changed. Isa was trying. Can you press your heel into the ground? Zeke asked gently. She closed her eyes, focused. Nothing happened. It's okay, he said softly. Sometimes your brain needs time to find the right path. It's like trying to move through a crowd. You just have to push through. Jonathan stood behind them, arms crossed, not out of skepticism this time, but mostly to keep warm. Why do you do all this? He asked, suddenly. Zeke glanced up. Because I remember what it felt like when my mom helped people. She made them feel like they mattered. I want to do that too. Jonathan nodded slowly. You ever think about doing something else? Sometimes, Zeke said. But this feels right. Jonathan looked at Isa. She was tapping her toes. Barely, but they moved. For the first time, he didn't speak. He just watched. And over the next few weekends, they kept coming. Same time, same place. Zeke kept teaching. Zeke had been showing Isa how to use rubber bands to strengthen her ankles. He rolled tennis balls under her feet, helping her brain reconnect with where her body was. He even taught Jonathan how to massage the pressure points behind her knees, explaining how every nerve still had a job, even when it went quiet. Then came the bad day. It was their fourth Sunday. Zeke arrived at the park like always, supplies in hand, hope in his chest. But when the familiar SUV pulled up, Isa wasn't smiling. Her eyes were red and puffy. Jonathan looked frustrated, jaw clenched. She doesn't want to do it today, he said curtly, lifting her into the wheelchair. Isa kept her gaze down, arms crossed tight. She wouldn't look at either of them. Zeke approached gently. What happened? I tried to move my legs this morning, Isa said, voice low and sharp. Nothing happened. Nothing. I'm tired of trying. It's pointless. Jonathan looked away, his jaw tightening. She's been frustrated all weekend. Zeke nodded slowly and knelt beside her again. You think I never get tired? He asked quietly. You think I didn't sit in a shelter crying because my mom couldn't afford medicine? And all I could do was watch? Isa's eyes flicked toward him. You're allowed to be mad, Zeke continued. I get mad too. But if you stop now, The part of you that wants to walk might stop trying too. She stared at the ground. I don't want you to give up, he added, softer this time. Because I haven't. A long silence. Then Isa whispered, I'm scared. Jonathan turned, surprised. It was the first time she'd said that out, loud. Zeke leaned in a little closer. I am too, he said. But being scared doesn't mean stop. It just means you're close to something big. Isa wiped her face with her sleeve. Okay, she said. Let's try again. And they did. Zeke guided her through the stretches gently, without much talking this time. Just calm, steady presence. Patience. Jonathan stepped in more, too, helping shift her weight, encouraging every little twitch of movement. Then, after 30 quiet minutes, Isa moved her right foot, not just a toe. Her whole foot. Her foot slid forward, slow and stiff, but it moved. Jonathan dropped to his knees beside her, eyes wide, like he wasn't sure he'd actually seen it. Do it again, he said. She did. Zeke just smiled, quiet and calm, and leaned back. He didn't need to say a word. Later that night, Jonathan stood outside his house on Crestview Drive, staring up at the moon. He'd stopped wondering who Zeke really was. That question didn't matter anymore. Inside, Isa was giggling. Really, giggling, as she retold the footslide story to her aunt over speakerphone. For the first time in 6 months, the house didn't feel like a hospital room. It felt like home again. But something deeper had begun to shift, not just in Isa's legs, but in Jonathan himself. That old weight in his chest, the guilt, the pride, the distance he'd built between himself and the world, was starting to crack. By Monday afternoon, Jonathan sat at his office desk, staring at an unsigned contract. His phone buzzed every few minutes with emails, calls, client updates. None of it felt urgent. What kept looping in his mind was that moment in the park, Isa's foot sliding forward like it finally belonged to her again. He'd seen it with his own eyes. And the person who helped make it happen was a 9-year-old kid with taped-up boots and a name that didn't even show up properly online. He opened his laptop and typed, Ezekiel Carter Birmingham, almost nothing. A few scattered mentions, some community newsletters, old-school records, a couple of blurry references to a Zeke and his mother, Monique Carter, from a local clinic. No current address. No real leads. Zeke was a ghost, except he wasn't. By Saturday, they were back at Harrington Park. But something had changed. Jonathan brought an extra mat, a fold-out chair, and when they arrived, he handed Zeke a sandwich. Didn't say anything about it. Just placed it next to him on the bench. Zeke placed the sandwich beside his gym bag and gave a small, grateful nod before tucking it away for later. Ready, Isa? He asked. She flashed a big thumbs up. Let's do this. They slipped back into their routine. Heat packs, stretches, toe flexes. This time, Jonathan joined in fully, sitting cross-legged on the grass and mimicking every movement. Zeke grinned, teasing, You messed up once already. Jonathan gave him a sideways glance. I haven't stretched since college. They both laughed. Even Isa, Zeke added. About 20 minutes in, Zeke leaned forward. All right, Isa, let's try something new. He pulled a belt from his bag and placed it gently under her knees, then showed Jonathan how to hold each end. She's going to try lifting both knees now, just a little. We help balance, but she controls the movement. Jonathan blinked in surprise. You sure? Zeke nodded confidently. She's ready. They gave Isa a few seconds, her brow furrowed, eyes narrowing in focus. A soft grunt escaped her lips, then, barely an inch but still, a lift of both knees. Jonathan stared, stunned. You did that? Isa smiled brightly. I did it. He swallowed hard. You really did it. Zeke's eyes stayed fixed on the belt as he nodded slowly. See? The body remembers. You just have to be patient enough to listen. Jonathan looked at him with newfound respect. You're something else, kid. Zeke didn't answer, just moved on, gently guiding Issa through the next stretch. After they packed up, Jonathan crouched beside Zeke. Where do you go after this? Zeke shrugged. Jonathan lowered his voice. You got a place to sleep? Zeke hesitated before replying. Sometimes. Jonathan exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. You ever think about staying with us for a while? Zeke's eyes widened. You serious? I've got a guest room. You wouldn't be in the way. Zeke looked down at his hands, uncertain. You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind a kid? Like me? Jonathan chuckled softly. After everything you've done for my daughter, they'd better not say a word. Zeke didn't answer right away, but Jonathan could see his mind working. The next morning, Zeke stood outside Jonathan's house, backpack slung over one shoulder and a rolled-up blanket tucked under his arm. Jonathan opened the door, dressed, in sweatpants and holding a coffee mug. Right on time, he said. Issa dashed into the hallway. Zeke, she called out. Jonathan smiled warmly. Hey, superstar, he stepped aside. Welcome home. The days that followed were quiet but meaningful. Zeke had his own room with a soft bed, clean sheets, and a small desk. He didn't say much, but never missed a morning stretch with Issa. Issa was now moving both feet, not walking yet, but her brain was reconnecting to her legs, remembering the movement. One night, as Jonathan washed dishes, he paused and leaned against the counter. Zeke, he called over his shoulder. Ever think about going back to school? Zeke, sketching at the kitchen table, looked up. Sometimes? Jonathan nodded. You're smart. You could go far. Zeke tilted his head. I want to help people walk again, like my mama did. Jonathan turned to face him. Then let's figure out how to get you there. Zeke gave a small smile. Okay. They didn't say much more that night, and didn't need to. For the first time in years, the Reeves household wasn't silent. It was filled with small sounds of life, footsteps, laughter, scribbles, and healing. It all began with a nurse from the Children's Medical Center who was walking her dog through Harrington Park one Sunday morning. She spotted a familiar face, Issa. She hadn't seen her outside her wheelchair in months, let alone smiling, lifting her knees, moving her toes, and standing. Beside Issa sat the same quiet boy who used to wait, outside the hospital doors every weekend. The nurse didn't interrupt. She simply observed from a distance. After some time, she went home and told her sister, who worked in patient services. A few days later, a physical therapist at the hospital mentioned to Jonathan, Hey, I heard Issa's making progress. Is that true? Jonathan nodded. Yeah. Thanks to someone they hadn't expected, the news spread quickly. The next time they arrived at Harrington Park, 2 other families were waiting on the bench near the big oak tree. One had a boy using a walker, the other a girl recovering from a stroke. Both sets of parents had heard about the kid who helped Issa move her legs again. Zeke glanced at Jonathan. Jonathan met his gaze and said quietly, You don't have to. Zeke adjusted the strap on his bag. I want to. That day, Zeke gave up his usual time with Issa to work with the 2 new children. He showed their parents how to use the towels for stretches, how to warm the rice packs just right, and how to encourage without pushing too hard. He spoke to the kids, not at them. You're not broken, he told one of them. You're just learning a different way to be strong. Issa watched quietly from her wheelchair, hands folded in her lap, without a single complaint. Later that afternoon, during the drive home, she said, I like watching him help people. Jonathan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Yeah, me too. Makes me feel like I'm part of something good. By the next weekend, 5 families showed up. The week after that, the number grew to 11. A local pastor brought folding chairs. A nearby diner started dropping off bagels and coffee. Someone printed flyers that read, "Free movement classes, Sundays at noon, Harrington Park." They didn't mention Zeke's name wasn't printed on the flyers, but everyone knew who he was. One Sunday, a local reporter arrived with a camera and notepad. Jonathan pulled Zeke aside and asked, "You okay with this?" Zeke looked around at the families, at the kids moving their limbs, at Isla laughing with a girl using a walker. He nodded. "As long as it's not about me, it's about them." The reporter wrote her story, which ran on the second page of the Birmingham Sunday Post, under the headline, "9-year-old with a gift helps dozens heal in a city park." They honored Zeke's wish and didn't share his full name, but word got out anyway. A local doctor offered to mentor him. A nonprofit asked if they could fund equipment. Someone else volunteered free tutoring. For the first time since his mother passed, people didn't just see Zeke, they truly saw him. But Zeke never bragged. He still laid out the towel the same way every Sunday, wore the same duct-taped boots, and always checked in with Isla before helping anyone else. The park, once silent and filled with weary bodies, had become alive with movement. And the boy, with no home, had become the heart of something bigger than himself. It had been 9 Sundays. 9 Sundays of towels spread on grass, of Isa's knees lifting higher, of small victories shared with strangers who had become something closer to family. But this Sunday felt different. Zeke sensed it even before they pulled into the park. The air was warmer, the trees swayed slower, and even Isa was quieter in the back seat, focused as if preparing for something big. When they arrived, a small crowd had already gathered. Not loud or flashy, just families setting up folding chairs, therapists kneeling, in front of children and parents with hopeful eyes, and right there in the middle was that same worn-out bench under the oak tree where Zeke sat. At first, Zeke didn't say anything. He unpacked his bag, rolled out the towel, and gave Isla a look. "You ready?" She nodded. No smile, just that serious, determined look again. Jonathan wheeled her to the center of the mat. Zeke knelt in front of her. "Same as before," he said softly. "We help you stand. You do the rest." Jonathan positioned himself behind her, hands steadying her under the arms. Zeke gently guided her legs into place. "Okay," Zeke whispered. "On 3. Isla closed her eyes. 1, 2, 3. Jonathan lifted. Zeke steadied her knees, and then she stood. Her legs trembled, her arms shook, but she was upright on her own 2 feet. The crowd fell silent. Some kids gasped. A mother clapped a hand over her mouth. Isla slowly opened her eyes and smiled. "I'm standing." Zeke blinked back a tear, something soft flickering in his eyes. Jonathan froze for a moment like he couldn't catch his breath, then released his hold. She stayed standing. He stepped back, shaking his head in disbelief. "She's doing it." Zeke also stepped back just a little. "She's been doing it!" Isla took one shaky step, then another. And then, because she was 6, brave, and didn't know fear, she took a 3rd step all on her own before falling into her father's arms. He caught her, laughing and crying, his hands trembling as he held her. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." Isla turned to Zeke. "You said I would." Zeke gave her a small grin. "I said we'd try." That afternoon, nobody hurried to leave the park. People stayed, talked, hugged. Some even prayed. Zeke sat back on the bench and watched quietly, as he always did. Later that night, Jonathan stood in the kitchen while Zeke poured cereal into a bowl. "You know," Jonathan said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, "you changed everything." Zeke didn't look up. "My daughter walked today, and it wasn't because of a hospital, a doctor, or some miracle medicine that she walked. She walked because a kid with nothing kept showing up, again and again, even when no one asked him to." Zeke nodded. That's exactly what my mom would have done. Jonathan's throat tightened. I wish she could have seen this. She did, Zeke said softly. I think she sees everything. Jonathan wiped his eyes. Zeke, he said quietly, you're going to change a lot of lives. Zeke looked up at him. I already am. There are people in this world who might not have fancy degrees, impressive resumes, or spotless pasts, but they carry something far more precious: heart, grit, and a reason to keep showing up. Sometimes, the most broken among us are the ones holding the tools to help others heal. If this story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. And if you know a kid like Zeke, or a girl like Isla, tell them this: you matter. You are needed.